All right, we are live. Okay, so we are debating today, should puberty blockers and top surgery be illegal for minors? Um, Mister8658 in the left corner here is on the yes side that it should be illegal, and Reverend Daisy Maelstrom on the right side is saying that no, it should not be illegal. Okay, so these guys are going to do about a minute or two of opening statements and then get into open dialogue. Anybody watching, you can put your questions in the chat, and after an hour of debate, I will ask these guys your questions. All right, let's go ahead and let's start with Daisy.
Oh, hey. All right. Thank you, Carson. Hello, mister. It's nice to meet you. My name's Daisy,
Nice.
Reverend Daisy Maelstrom. Oh, thank you very much. In this conversation, we are going to be talking about puberty blockers for underage adults and children. For underage children. So, basically, anybody under 18. For a quick synopsis, this is what puberty blockers are. Puberty blockers are something that we give children when they enter early onset diabetes or when we want to hit, not diabetes, sorry. We record these things at 7 in the morning. I do not expect to be perfect today. All right. Puberty blockers are things that we give children to pause early puberty or when they enter puberty to give parents and families a few extra, I don't know, years on the outset of helping them with their children and their gender identity. Now, this has been a hot potato for a long time. However, gender affirming treatment is over 100 years old. Gender affirming pills like these are very similar to things like hair plugs or breast augmentation. It's called gender affirming surgery treatment. Gender affirming treatment isn't necessarily gender affirming surgery. I'll be awake by the time this is over. So, this process, the entirety from childhood through adulthood, especially when it comes to puberty blockers for children, is actually blocked by a ton of organizations. Now, this includes the AMA, American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Psychiatric Association, the Endocrine Society, the Pediatric Endocrine Society, the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the American College of Physicians. Treatment for this process, by the time that you actually get to using puberty blockers, you've already been in treatment by psychologists and psychiatrists and medical doctors for years. You can't even start puberty blockers until you're like 10 or 11 after puberty started, and this process is carefully monitored by a complex medical team, including doctors that check for bone density. Uh, in effect, puberty blockers have shown no long term poor effects on individuals, and it's only a temporary measure to give families and medical teams time to help with children. And we can move on from there after we start talking.
All right, Mister, you're up. What is your opening 1 to 2 minute statement?
So, Luprin and other puberty blockers, which he did a great job being a salesman for, can be responsibly used for precocious puberty. I acknowledge that. However, the sales pitch that actually did generate out of a sales program, not a medical investigation, was that if we can use this for precocious puberty, why don't we start using this on more kids that are going through gender dysphoria? And they made a push for that. It's still an off-label use because this did not originate with the medical community. It originated with the sales team of Lupron, first and foremost, in 2011. And this notion that you can just pause puberty is not only not founded in science, but um, from what has been shown in Europe, actively sterilizing. So, with precocious puberty, the child is smaller, the doses are less, And it's to get them to their 11th birthday, where they're taken off of their puberty blockers and allowed to go through a slightly early pubescent stages. Whereas when you are actively stopping puberty from 11 to 15, the dosages necessary, because the child is larger and so on and so forth, it results in sterilization in at least a third and maybe up to two-thirds of the cases. There's not a lot of good data because we're still under 10,000 solid documented cases, but it is sterilizing the children.
Okay. Oh, go
Also,
ahead. Finish. Please finish.
when it
Sorry, I
comes
didn't mean
to
to interrupt.
top surgery and other surgeries, um, I'm against that until the 18th birthday. I believe that any dysmorphia treatment prior to the 18th birthday should be just placating. If they're 7 or younger, you're a dinosaur. That's nice, Jimmy. You're a dinosaur today. Good for you. And if they are genuinely experiencing some form of dysmorphia from 8 onwards, they should have regular psychological treatment only. And after they go through puberty and 10 years of treatment, if they are still dead set on transitioning upon their 18th birthday, then and only then should they get mastectomies and castration and various other things. That's my position.
Oh, excellent. Okay, give me a second. I went over everything. All right, so the study about infertility is a relatively recent study. All I do is found it on Fox News, so I don't actually know a whole lot about that. Um, so if that is true, then it is something we need to be looked at. Ultimately, the thing about puberty blockers is the science. The reasons that it's backed behind all these medical associations is because those medical associations are confident that it isn't harmful. Now, the good thing about science and doctors is that when it is proved to be harmful, if that's the case, then these systems should switch over and say it's not safe. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. The places like the UK already have it in place that it's much more difficult to apply puberty blockers to children. And they have their own reasons. But places like Australia also agree with the United States. The United States doesn't necessarily have the top ranked medical system in the world, but we definitely have one of the most invested in. And those people who have checked these things out think it works. And by check these things out, I mean doctors. When we talk about on label and off label, on label means what's on label. For instance, Viagra was on label for high blood pressure. And then they sold it as a boner pill. And you know what works? Boner pills. So just because something off label doesn't mean that it doesn't work. The companies that develop puberty blockers have straight up said that the reason that they haven't applied to the FDA so it can become on label is specifically because it is a hot button political issue. So the fact that we even have these conversations at large is one of the reasons that it's not on label.
Yeah. Um, so the entire premise behind acquiescing to every demand the transgender movement has, simply because they are constantly threatening suicide, um, is where I really have a problem with this, because the records from Europe show that when you do intervene, suicidality goes up. When you do intervene and placate all of these notions, depression goes up. Uh, angry and violent tendencies go up. All of the negative side effects go up with more treatment, not down. When you take this, I'm using air quotes, you can't see, compassionate stance and psychological, um, this compassionate approach to the psychological treatment of these children and young adults. And so there's also the other thing is it's becoming much more prevalent the more that it gets talked about and put on the news and so on and so forth. And so we've seen an explosion in children identifying as kumquats and cats and fae people and demisexual and all of this other new stuff, all 278 new genders that they have. And it's maddening to see people given over to a depraved mind to that extent.
Hey, Mister, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
First one is when you say studies in Europe, this isn't the European Union. Are you talking about a specific place in Europe, or um,
Um, I've seen some data out of France, some data out of Germany, and some data out of Estonia.
mhm.
But data on this is really hard to find because everybody just wants to give you a very long soliloquy and not actually reveal any data. And so going through journals and things is really difficult because everything is just soliloquies and they're really stingy about releasing data.
Could you expand what you mean by soliloquy for me?
Soliloquy is a monologue, type of monologue.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. No, I just wanted to understand. I wanted to make sure we were using it the same way. Because, like when my brain thinks soliloquy, I'm thinking like to be or not to be. But it really is just a dude talking to himself. So I get what you're saying. Um,
Yeah.
okay. No, I mean, like I've seen data is interesting. There's a tone that I'm curious about. And from here, I'm really just trying to understand your perspective because obviously we don't agree on the issue. Um,
Yeah.
so this idea that children are casually saying, I'm a kumquat, and then everyone around them being like, oh, he's a kumquat, clearly. His pronouns are cum and quat. Like, it's strange to me that anybody could feel like that's happening. Like, I wonder if the
Um,
people, not you, I wonder if the people who say this, generally speaking, are bad parents. Because the only two things that can be going on are they think other parents aren't as smart as they are and wouldn't question their children, or that they're bad parents and think that they would just do that. They would just listen to their kid. Like, I'm curious where that comes from, where you think something a child says immediately becomes, well, let's call the psychiatrist immediately. Like, where does that mindset come from?
so I've got three kids. One's an adult. I'm actually a grandfather now.
Congratulations.
And yeah, um, it's not a tact that I would take. It's not a route that I would take. Um, but I see the explosion of it. And when I see that the numbers are going up to, it depends on who you ask. Some have numbers as low as 23,000. Others have numbers as high as 86,000. There's an outliner that says that it's 107,000
What's
in the last
107,000?
5 years.
Oh, you're talking about
And
number of children that identify as trans?
yes,
And that is in the entire country?
yes.
Okay, no, go ahead and finish your thought. I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify.
Um, when you see three order of magnitude jump in something, when something goes from 600 to 86,000, something is up. Something is seriously up. And even if you see something go from 600 to 23,000, there's something to be concerned about. If suddenly, like the, what was it? The carbohydrate thing where everybody
Mhm.
was celiac disease, when suddenly everybody was allergic to glucose and everything all of a sudden, And it went from being everybody eats bread to suddenly 10% of the population has celiac disease and nobody can eat carbs. There's a real cause for question. And it turned out Roundup was on the bread. And that's what was giving everybody issues. And so more cleaning had to be introduced in order to get rid of that. When it comes to trans youth going from 600 to 23,000 or 600 to 86,000 in the span of 5 years, something is noticeably wrong and needs to be addressed. Either it's a social contagion or something is going on that needs to be fundamentally addressed.
Okay. There's a couple of things I wanted to just catch up with you on. I wanted to make sure you got through that thought. There was a point in time where humans didn't have a word for the color blue, but blue existed. Like things exist before we have words for them. So I came out as bisexual in the late 90s. I'm almost 50 now. And this was just after the tail end of the AIDS epidemic. Now, the reason I came out as not bisexual is because that's the only word I knew existed for it. Words and terminology changes. Older trans folks used to call themselves trannies, but younger folks consider that to be strange. So you wouldn't come out as a tranny now, but you used to.
Yeah.
When the
When
numbers
the
of
word
something
was
changes,
transvestite,
right,
now it's transgender or
right, but
transsexual.
that's just terminology, right? But that
Yeah.
means that the number of transgender people grew exponentially once the word started to change over. When we diagnose something, for instance, the difference between type 2 and type 1 diabetes, there's an explosion in the second type that's discovered. So the reason that we have more people that are children is not whatever the weird term social contagion means, because outside of this conversation, I've never heard that used in a way that wasn't like eugenics. Like, I will allow you, of course, to explain the way that you're coming from with that terminology. But when we
So
talk about
there's
the
mass
increase in numbers,
hysteria that happens. I'm
oh,
sorry. You
give me
have
one
more
more
to say.
second. It's okay, mister. It's fine. It's difficult, especially when we can't see each other, to make sure. So I wanted to touch real base before we got too far away on it. The suicide thing. It is true that trans children are 4 times more likely to have suicidal ideation than children. And it has been shown in the United States by the United States doctors that treatment can reduce that by 70%. In some cases, this actually lowers the suicidal tendencies of children that are trans to lower than the cis children, which means the children that aren't trans. So I'm curious where you get the information because the medical numbers, those are actually on the side of pro UV blockers and that it's not long-term harmful and that it does benefit the treatment of children. So when you use the term compassionate with quotation marks about it, I'm curious what you mean because with the way that we have it now and the treatment that has been used since the 90s for this has been shown to have been useful and helpful and has saved a lot of lives. So please continue. Go ahead and explain to me what you mean by social contagion and whatever other thoughts that you have.
So what I see is the veneration of transgender individuals, and the lauding and putting on a pedestal of trans individuals to the point where it becomes hip, cool, and the thing to do to gain clout and or popularity to come out as trans, and thus there is a like mass hysteria or trend or whatever, a social contagion element to, oh, I want to be like Jazz Jennings, or I want to be like
That's
RuPaul,
good.
or so on and so forth, and be famous, um, or be the center of attention. And so I'm going to do this, even though if riding a motorcycle gave me the same kind of attention, I would do that.
Okay, so the premise of that, do you feel like the experience of trans children is popularity? You think they're the popular kids in school?
I think that in the places where it is growing exponentially, yes. In San Francisco and LA and Portland and Seattle and Chicago and New York City, where the trans population is exploding, I think there is an element of, aren't I an awesome parent? I have a transgender child. Aren't I an awesome person? I'm transgender, is a social contagion that is playing a part in those communities.
Okay, so I've lived in both Portland and Seattle. Um, and the percentage of trans kids would be difficult to eyeball because you can't tell. Children are just children. Like, I also don't spend a lot of time trying to determine how trans a kid is by looking at them. I think clocking transness is kind of a strange phenomenon. From what I'm trying to understand from your
I'm in
conversation.
Louisiana.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I'm from these places you're talking about, and there's not an outbreak of trans children. Trans children make up about 1.5% of the population, estimated, of course, because you can't know those things, which is significantly less than the percentage of adult trans people. You see the difference here because it's not common for children to have this interaction with their gender and their sexuality because these constructs aren't always formed. Gender is something you have to kind of be taught. Like bioessentialism or the idea that genitals make men more aggressive is just weird. Like a lot of the aggression is in our culture. Like we have gun problems here because our men have to be tough, whereas countries who have high gun ownership in other countries don't have that. So it's not being a man that makes you wild. So this idea that transness is itself some kind of social contagion, I find to be, and don't, I mean this in the best way, but I think the idea is reprehensible. That things that aren't harming others aren't causing a problem to anyone
Well,
else,
it
are
is
all of a
harming
sudden
them.
social. Well, hold on. Let's go back to this. Um, this is something that we're not going to agree on because when you have like these numbers that say that these children are being harmed, that's not what the people who do them, the doctors, the surgeons, the psychiatrists, the
Well,
psychologists, they don't believe that we're harming. This
they're
idea that this
basing
is
it
bad.
on they're basing it on bad science. Whether you go back to Dr.
Okay.
Mark Magnus, who was a Nazi and performed all of the first transvestite surgeries as a euthanasia program to sterilize all of these people in Nazi Germany. And then if you go further, his work was developed by Dr. Money, who sexually exploited children and victimized the twins in a heavily publicized way that is just demonstrably evil. And all of this is bad science compounding on bad science with ill intent beneath it to victimize these people because they have a mental illness. They seek to harm them further by mutilating their bodies.
Okay, so just to make sure you're clear, are you saying that the puberty blockers were invented by the Nazis?
No, all of the transgender surgeries, vaginoplasty, the first mastectomies, and all of that were developed in the 20s, 30s, and 40s by the Nazis.
Okay, so did you know Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, right? Yet people still follow the Constitution. Terrible people sometimes have positive influences, and whether or not something was invented, like surgeries or whatever, there is a fact is that a lot of the books that were burned by Nazis in 1933 was on trans science, because Nazis very openly were against the very idea of transnet. They would call it a social contagion. That doesn't mean you're a Nazi. It just means that you're using one of the same lines that Nazis did at the time. Trans
No,
folks were put in the Holocaust.
you're the one that's using the weaponized compassion in order to trick these people into doing systemic harm to them by sterilizing them with a sterilization program, which is what the Nazis did with Action T3,
Okay.
and then was expounded on by Dr. Money and he did the same thing, and he built upon Action T3 and brought it into the mainstream in America's psychology and Canadian psychology and victimized the twin boys. Do you know about Joan and Jane?
I know we could go off on these side tangents a lot, but side question: do you believe in vaccines?
Yeah.
So when doctors support vaccines, they're following good science, despite that controversy, but not the doctors that follow established science when it comes to treatment of trans children and trans adults. Like these are the same like medical boards. The American Medical Association is in charge of both. Where do you get the idea that the science as used now, not what happened in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but science we use now is harmful? Like it's the same medical
I think
school.
it is the same malicious intent to
Okay.
victimize people that have this mental disorder and
Okay.
sterilize them is the same intent that is carried through as a standard operating procedure rather than addressing the root cause of why these things were done in the first place.
Okay. Well, another fun fact: transness existed in other cultures before our country existed. Like transness, the idea of it, the language, of course, doesn't translate because they don't speak English. But the idea of there being more genders and people's genitals and the sex they're born with being something they weren't born with has been around outside of our ideas for a very long time. I think it's interesting that we act like this is something that's new. Like these folks weren't
The
here.
magnitude is new.
How do you know that? What the numbers
It
are
went
new
from
because
one
we
in
know we're counting them now,
380,000. It went
right?
from 100. It went from 1 in 380,000 to more than 1%. That is an
Okay, let's
incredible leap.
I know you're focused now on the amount of diagnosed. Let's use your terminology. If we think of them as mental health patients, this helps. We've increased our diagnostic capabilities. And you're saying the increase in diagnostic capabilities means that these people didn't exist beforehand. There are the same percentage of gay children in Texas as there are in Washington State, but there's less people that claim to, or that claim or are open about or communicate that they're gay children in Texas because it's more dangerous to be gay in Texas. So the amount of people, and this is a point that we can keep coming back to if you like, doesn't affect anything because these are things we understand as of now. We still haven't gone back and addressed to the idea that there's this interesting conspiracy, it sounds like, that you believe in, where there is some weird they that exists that is somehow trying to get us to venerate transness, as you use, put them on a pedestal, despite the fact in real life, most people don't have their existence talked about in conversations. Most people aren't considered a social contagion. So to me, there seems to be a dissonance between the idea that we venerate folks and a significant portion of the population thinks that they are inherently broken and mentally damaged people. That's not something that people try to be. People try to be influencers and celebrities. And despite myself feeling like there's some mental damage that happens when you become a celebrity, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are not going to do it for that reason. However, transness isn't anything that's beneficial to you other than what the benefits psychological. I don't know where you're getting the idea that there's this strange group that's trying to trick us into being trans, or what benefits you think that could be. Like, why would anybody even do this? I'm so curious where this
I
stuff comes from.
Well, it comes from the entire LGBT
E.
quilt bag. We're going to just use the quilt
Quilt
bag
bag. You're
acronym
talking about you're talking
because
about the quilts
I'm
that
not
they
going to
make
do
for.
all 38 letters.
Oh, you don't have to. That's why we use the word queer. I do. It's an old word because I don't need to explain to you my
Yeah,
complex gender and sexuality, like because it doesn't
queer
matter.
is great. Okay, it's the whole
Yeah,
queer movement. We're going to
sure.
just go with that. The whole queer movement.
I like it.
Um, and
You and you think these people have
this,
power? You think these people can control the government and the
well,
medical association?
No, it's not even that. It's
So then
that
who's
there's
doing
this
it?
impetus. Let me explain.
Yes.
It's this impetus to victimize the children and expose them at younger and younger ages. And it's pervasive with the queer movement to expose them at younger and younger ages and to educate them, which I would say indoctrinate and brainwash them
You
at
would. You would
younger
say
and
that.
younger ages. I would
Sure.
say that.
I know.
And so it came to a head in Florida where
Yeah,
there
Florida.
was a pilot program to teach third graders age specific um, sex education. And so
What
they
do you
got a class of
what do you
32
mean by sex
students.
education? Like what do you mean? Like
Oh,
they told you to
I'm
stick
gonna
fingers?
explain it.
Or
I'm gonna
okay.
explain it if you give me a
No,
chance.
go ahead. I'm so
All right.
curious about this.
Yeah, this is how we got the Don't Say Gay bill. Okay.
Yeah, we all know those are good.
Yeah, it was a wonderful piece of legislation that
Uh-huh.
addressed a real harm.
Which harm?
So let's go into it. So, on the billing of we're going to do sex education for third graders that is
Hmm.
age specific, they got 32 parents to volunteer their kids to be in this pilot program in
Hmm.
Florida where they were going to read gender queer and other things to them and introduce them to sex ed in third grade. And there was a teacher selected and a school board appointed it and everything and so forth. There was workbooks and everything. Parents signed off on it, and then they sent their kids off to school. And then one of the girls, who was 7 years old in this class, came home and had dinner with her parents. And they asked her, "What did you learn in school today?" And she said that when you have anal sex, you need to enema twice so that you can protect the penetrating partner from a urinary tract infection.
How old was she when she said that sentence?
She said something to that effect. That's what she learned in school
Okay.
as
So
7 years
like
old.
a 7-year-old didn't say anima. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, okay. I'm so fascinated by these
Anyways, let
stories.
me finish the story because that's not
Okay, go
the end of the
ahead.
story.
It gets better.
It gets a lot better.
Oh, kill me. Throw it at me. Tell me this whole story. I love this 7-year-old.
So
She's
her
precocious.
father
Yeah,
gets upset and pulls all the information out of her and finds
sure.
out that she's being taught the dangers of scat play and eating ass and all of this.
This 7-year-old
And
said this.
so he
7-year-old said
goes to
scat
his
play.
bedroom. He goes
Yeah,
to his bedroom and
love it.
he loads his shotgun and he
He did.
leaves the house, scaring his wife. His wife calls the police on him and he's apprehended a couple of
Shocking.
blocks away from the teacher's house with a shotgun in the vehicle. And he spends the couple of nights in jail.
So,
His
Florida
outrage
man,
over that is completely understandable. And as the rest of these parents found out what a teacher got up in front of their 32 students and said, they were outraged and demanded blood. And so the teacher ended up having to go into witness protection because they
you
were
guys
out
were
for
saying
blood, and
dangerous,
reasonably so. And the
dangerous.
school board was also in some sort of hiding, and it went all the way up to Governor DeSantis. And they tried to charge him, but because they diffused responsibility, nobody was at fault. Nobody committed a crime. It was all on the up and up. The school board approved it, the principal approved it, the teacher just followed orders. And so they crafted legislation that said that if you so much as have 23 times 3 as a math problem to somebody under the age of 12, you're going to prison for 5 years. And that's what the Don't Say Gay bill is about, is that no teacher is ever going to be allowed to do that to students again.
You know what I heard is Florida man does fentanyl, takes a shotgun to his kid's school. Mom calls, dude goes to jail. This brings me all the way back to that whole thing about like we believe that a superintendent, like a whole adult with a college degree, and the school board, all adults, and all with like scat play, yeah, teach the third graders. Like it's so wild that we would hear a story like this as an adult and be like, that's real. A 7-year-old said those things, and it was fine. When the authorities looked into it, it's fine. And instead of going, oh, the authorities looked into it, I guess this story isn't real, we go, no, the 7-year-old didn't make up a story, didn't say all these words. Like to me, I'm just kind of curious how one's brain gets to the point where you hear the story and you go, oh, it's immediately believable. Like this is why some of the politics that comes out of the South or my home state of Idaho, to me, kind of blows my mind because I would watch in Idaho where people would vote for things like this based on these stories that were just objectively not true. The scat play thing
It
doesn't happen in
is
school.
true.
No, you
She
believe
did
it's
have to
true.
flee the state.
Did she?
The
Well, no.
teacher had
See,
to flee the state and go into witness protection.
okay, so if you get chased out of your state for, let's say, molesting dogs, that doesn't mean you molested dogs. It means people believe you molested dogs and acted in a way about it. So just because the teacher had to run doesn't mean she was molesting dogs or teaching kids scat play. It just means somebody created a convincing narrative. Now, we're not going to agree on whether the story happened. And I don't mean this condescendingly, because there's just no way to say it any other way. I don't live in a reality where adults and superintendents do that kind of thing. And it's not that I couldn't be convinced otherwise. It's just that I would come down immediately on the side of that story is insane, man. If you told that to me drunk in a bar, I would laugh at you. Like, I understand that you believe that. I don't know how. I just wouldn't believe that if somebody said it about you. I've never met you, but I wouldn't immediately believe this guy molests dogs. Just because a 7-year-old told their dad and their dad got a shotgun and went to kill you. So, like, I know you believe it, but how are we supposed to move past a story that is almost objectively insane? Like, how can I believe this story happened?
Because when all of the legislatures, the state legislators of Florida looked into it, they 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 confirmed its existence and were troubled by it and passed the blah, 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 the don't say gay bill.
Hold
And
on,
they had
Florida.
to put everything in there in order to make sure that there was no question that should this ever happen again, the teacher will go to prison for at least 5 years and have to register as a sex offender for the rest of their life. And so too will the school board and the principal and everybody else. That this will never be allowed to happen again because it did creep in and it did happen.
I'm not really able to find the story online.
I know that they scrubbed a good bit of it because they were trying to protect that teacher.
Who scrubbed it?
They do the Google and whatnot buries things in results so that you can't find it easily.
Oh yeah, no, I mean they do that, but who's they? Like that has to be paid for. Like, are we talking about like this woman got chased out of state about a story that I can't find online, but we can't find it online because the woman was chased out of state kind of logic. This like I know we're spending a lot of time. I'm just trying to nail down your thought process and how you hear a story that is difficult to find online, 100% believe it's true, even though it doesn't seem like it should be true. And I know what it seems. What does that even mean? But this is one of the reasons why this conversation is so difficult to have with people because we don't live in the same reality. And I don't want to I'm not trying to make fun of you. It's just difficult from my perspective. This is similar to when we believe in vaccines, talk to anti-vaxxers. It's like, shoot me full of all the science juice. Like I have diabetes and asthma. I've had them before I got a lot of my vaccine shots. But when people would tell me the vaccines are crazy, they would say these stories that I also just didn't believe. And it turns out I'm fine. Turns out vast majority of people who go through gender treatment are fine. It turns out if a child comes up to you when they're 10 and they go, "Hey, I'm struggling with not feeling like a girl," most parents don't go, "All right, get this kid surgery." Like this just doesn't happen. It's never happened in the history of anything.
I want to hop in here for a quick
Well,
second because
yeah,
I have an idea, a recommendation just along
yeah.
about what you guys just talked about. I think it might be interesting for each of you to answer how you would feel if that story was provable. So let's say that that somebody in the class like filmed it and everything that was just said
Okay.
it just happened. Daisy, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts would be if that were the case. Same with you, Mister. Where if when the kid says this thing, the teacher says, "Oh, actually, I have a camera set up. I filmed the entire thing, and here's the class," and it's not there at all.
Yeah, we watched
How
third
do
graders
each?
having this conversation.
Yeah, how do
Okay, well,
each
the
of you
first
feel?
thing I would do is what most of the country would do. We would roll our eyes and be like, the fuck is wrong with Florida? How is all this garbage happening in Florida? And that's what I would do. Because nothing I believe changes. An intelligent, reasonable adult wouldn't do this. So if it did happen, I'd be like, those people are fucking weird. Like, even if this were real, it doesn't mean it's happening everywhere. It means it happened in one weird class by one weird teacher in Florida. I would have big questions on how it was looked into, and there was nothing found wrong about it. Like, that, I guess, would lead to the media explosion that I would learn that it was real, but the fact that that never happened is wild. So even if it happened, even if there's a video, I'd be like, the fuck is wrong with that teacher? Not what is wrong with every teacher in America. That's kind of, I think, one of the difference. I'm not quick to take these stories, and even if they were real, I mean, well, it's not happening everywhere. Just like, yeah, go ahead. I'll let Mister answer the question.
um, that story I think is real, and because of it, I have an animus towards the entirety of the quilt bag movement because it is proving the slippery slope fallacy to be a heuristic and not a fallacy.
Well, Mister,
And it
really
is
quick, I just want to cut you off. Just since Daisy answered that question, I'm curious what you would think if right now there was like camera footage because the teacher films their classes, and it was proven that at least that story was fabricated or like just like let's say completely made up. Would that change your stance on the idea of the "Don't Say Gay" bill?
um if it was just something innocuous like um the mention of sodomy as something that exists and um the child just went wild with it and then the parents made false assumptions and so on and so forth. Everybody made false assumptions all the way up the chain and it resulted in the don't say gay bill. I still think it would be a good bill because the impetus has been to shield and protect pedophiles ever since the Louisiana Kennedy case, where they made it so that you cannot execute pedophiles. And now we're finally making some progress in Idaho, your home state, apparently,
Yeah.
where they just passed a new bill so that they can execute pedophiles, which I think is wonderful progress in the right direction.
Okay, well,
Now
I
I
don't know
will.
if we should hop off
Oh, go
onto
ahead.
that topic, but thank you
No,
both
it's
for
fine.
answering that question. And you guys
Yeah.
should continue. We got about 15 minutes left of the
Really.
open conversation.
So I wanted to see if there was anything I wanted to follow up on. Um, I don't know what you're talking about. That. You know what? It's so wild. I haven't. I know. I had to look it up because it seemed familiar the whole quilt bag thing, but it is actually something that comes out of the LGBTQI plus community. That's why I like to use queer as an alternate. So while it sounds weird, I just wanted to admit that that is actually really good usage and a good word. Thank you very much. I am curious about the idea of slippery slope fallacy. Um, a lot of this stuff originates as a modern political hot potato because the conservative movement lost on things like gay marriage. Um, they lost on this pushback. And then they fell back on this whole why won't somebody think of the children? You know, that lady from the Simpsons episodes, this pearl clutching attitude that the right sometimes uses to be like, oh, think of the children. And that's brought us to this. We lost the conversations. The right lost the conversations when it comes to conversations like, can gay people get married? Should gay people be out? Kind of conversations. Now we're back to the point where we're pushing on those ideas again. I wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court is forced to look at gay marriage being a thing. The right has this obsession with sticking their fingers into anything queer related and deciding what's good for them, leaving it outside of that community, leaving it outside their medical professionals. So I'm kind of curious also about this idea of where the genesis of your thought comes from on why this stuff is inherently harmful, despite the fact that overwhelmingly it's never been shown to be harmful. If the studies they do eventually come out and say it is, like I've already agreed that that's fine. I'm allowed to change my opinion based on current medical information. But current medical consensus is it's not. Like socially, we know this came out after all this problem, just like the Tea Party and the current Trump movement came out of how much they hated Obama being elected. Like these things are very easily tracked. So we're here because they got mad about the gays. They got mad about adult trans. And now we're talking about child trans. The percentage of children that get treatment are small. The percentage of children that move on to things like puberty blockers are even smaller because, as you can imagine, it's not something that people want to do frivolously. It just doesn't happen. This conversation, we act like it does, but it's not common. By the time people go to surgery, something Mister said is 18. Well, by the time you actually get to surgery, you're going to be pretty close to 18 because you need to usually be in treatment for 10 years before they even consider it. Puberty blockers are just a chance to give you that extra breathing room to see if we're going that direction as managed by a team. So I'm kind of curious how this refined process that had been developed over 30 years is all of a sudden harmful, aside from the fact that it's a social movement pushed on the right because they're losing in every other gay issue. Feel free to push back on that. Like what other source is this coming from? Because this wasn't an issue for a long time. Like, why is it a problem now?
Yeah. I have a few things about that. One,
Sure.
homosexuality is fundamentally a bad thing for a society to indulge
Wow.
because it lowers the birth rate and population growth. And if you are below 2.1, your society is going to collapse and die off. And so it is an Iron Age adaptation to have religion stamp that out and discourage that as much as possible, and
Stay
to
afloat.
encourage
Bring out the
by
Crusades.
by default since the Iron Age, and we have built society on that because it is a universal principle of mathematics that we can prove now, but they understood it in the Iron Age out of practicality to discourage that and to encourage birth. Most of the Iron Age gods were all fertility gods, and the reason why we have those
That's
cultures
actually
and
not true.
understand them.
I'm a pagan. I can speak to that too. That's not true. A
Yeah.
lot of popular ones were fertility gods, but the vast majority were
Yes.
not.
Well, and the reason why we know which ones were fertility gods from various societies is because those societies that had prominent and prevalent fertility gods are the ones that survived. Those that don't failed and went the way of the dodo.
You're talking about survivor's bias. I'm so
Yeah.
fascinating that you think the Iron Age idea that the religion exists to stamp out homosexuality because it causes lower birth rates. Like this blows my mind in ways that everything else in this conversation, like you literally just said that, well, the Iron Age used religion to stamp out
Well,
homosexuality.
that
Like that's
we have built
a whole
society
realm
off of progressive
of killing
iterations,
homos. I
not
to me,
killing them,
oh,
discouraging it.
out. Oh, okay, scaring. We use the term in the
Discouraging.
closet. I, discouraging is so strong. It's such a wild word to use. Like I'm so still trapped in this idea of like we are against. The statement here is you're against puberty blockers because we're supposed to stamp out the gays. Like you stamped out. Like it's such a weird choice of words, and I'm trying to be really respectful here, but quite frankly, that's insane. Like
Okay.
religion does exist for that. Jesus never talked about the issue. Paul talked about it, but you know what? Paul came in after the church. Paul wrote all the letters, but none of those have the words in red. I'm also a preacher's kid. Like this idea that religion exists to kill the gays, wild, wild. Or
Well,
encouraging
it's one of the
homosexuality,
foundational
also
things.
weird. It's
Religion
not.
exists. Let me make my point.
Okay,
Religion
go.
exists as the mother, whereas the law exists as the father, in order to
Wow.
guide society in the right direction. And
How
that's
close
what
are
it
you with
is.
your adult child?
Huh?
How close are you with your adult child?
Pretty close. I mean, we're on the opposite sides of the country. She's in
Okay,
Indiana.
no.
I'm in
I'm just curious.
Louisiana.
Because my dad's not as crazy as this conversation, but he is pretty far out there. And we don't talk. Granted, I had a much more troubled childhood, and I'm assuming my dad was
Well,
much worse than you
she's
are as a
given me
parent.
my first grandchild and
Oh,
is
nice.
married at
Oh, no, great.
21.
It's weird that that's a positive thing. Marriage is fine. I was married twice. I met my second wife on 9/11. I make some interesting choices, but I'm just so
I got
hyper
drunk on
focused
9
now.
11.
Oh, yeah, I'm just so fascinated by this idea that you believe that one of the foundations of faith is to be anti-gay. Like, to me, that's wild. Also, the fact that what the church wants should mean anything in a society where a lot of people don't believe.
Well, what do you think
Like,
evil means?
I don't think evil exists, but that is such a longer other conversation. We
Well,
label
no,
things.
it is my point.
Okay,
Evil
well then let me
is
get to that.
something that is damaging to society if engaged in. That's why
Okay,
homosexuality is defined as evil, because it does damage society.
defined
That's
by
why
who?
theft and murder and all of these other things are evil,
You're
is
saying
because they
so many
damage
things right now.
society.
Okay, so who defines homosexuality as evil? Because it's not the head of the Catholic Church, that's most of the Christians in most of the world. It's not the head of any of the major Christian churches in this country. So who is defining it as evil? Like what moral authority is this subjective term being placed on an objective group of people? Like who's diagnosing that? Like who's defining? You're making
It
an
is
appeal to authority.
eisegesis from the word of God itself.
So explain that in language that the average viewer would understand.
You said you were a pastor's kid, so I figured you understood the term. Um,
No, I mean I don't. I don't understand how you're using it. I would like
Eisegesis
to.
is God breathed is the way
Okay,
you say it to kids.
right.
But eisegesis is having exited from the text rather than being read into the text.
Okay,
And
so it was told to me in a vision. I got it. So
no, 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 no,
anti-homosexuality
no,
is the
no,
basis of
no, no,
religion, but it's
no. It's
because
when
it's
you
drawn
allow
from
the
the text.
scriptures to dictate. It's when you allow the scriptures to dictate rather than taking your preconceived notions and fitting them into the scriptures.
Isn't that okay? So drawing something that's not out of the text is not applying a preconceived notion, but reading the text directly is applying a preconceived notion.
No, you've got that backwards. It is in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy that homosexuality is fundamentally wrong, evil, and sinful.
Doesn't say that.
Yes, it does. Man
Go
laying with a
ahead.
man is wrong, sinful, and evil. Woman laying with a woman is wrong, sinful, and evil. It
You
is
know
there
that's
in
not what it
Leviticus.
says in the original language. But we're getting off the topic here. I'm just kind of curious. Like, A, I would question the fact that even if it was in a Bible, that doesn't mean anything. Like, this isn't a Christian nation. It was founded by theists. They really didn't want the state controlled by a
We've
religion.
built society on
We
Judeo Christian values.
Society existed here before we got here. We say a lot of stuff in
The
this
good red
conversation where
road
you're
also
implying.
discourages homosexuality.
Okay, I'm gonna pause you guys just because this element is off topic, and
Yeah, no, go ahead.
this is a
Yeah.
perfect time for a question I want to bring in
Yeah, do it.
from
Well,
myself
I had three
before.
other points I wanted to say, and then we got into religion deeply.
Okay,
Um,
Yeah,
okay, so
so
cool.
we won't have time for all that, but go ahead and at least get one of those points out. And if Daisy wants, I mean, I guess you could put all 3 points out. So you
It's
can
your
pick.
time, man. I don't have an appointment for another 90 minutes.
So
So
in
you
5
spend it how you like.
Okay, in 5 minutes, we're going to stop the open conversation, and then there'll be questions. So, Mister, go
Sure.
ahead and either ask one of those
Okay.
points or all
So
three, and then you got 5 minutes.
also, I felt like I was accused of being a Trumpian. I'm a libertarian. And
Hmm.
if you're just doing this in your own home and being quiet about it, I have absolutely no problem with it. When you are victimizing people and putting it in front of everybody in every show and everything, that's when I start to have problems with it, because then it is lauding and venerating and promoting it as the preferred way of being, and that is detrimental to society. Another point, yes, I agree. It is absolutely absurd to see a girl climb a tree and demand that she have a double mastectomy the next day. I don't think that is happening, but I think it's happening in too short of a period of time. What was
I
my third
also
point?
agree that imaginary scenarios can be very frustrating.
Well, one of the things that they have in the literature is a girl climbing a tree is indicative of transgender behavior, and that she should be evaluated for gender dysmorphia and talked into it, essentially
It's a
educated on
dysphoria.
it.
There's a difference between dysphoria and dysmorphia, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah, all of the terms are meant to obfuscate and to confuse rather than to
Obfuscate.
speak clearly.
We're both having struggles with words today. It's obfuscate.
Yes, it is
Not
very
to be
early.
pedantic, not to be pedantic, but I'm being pedantic now. Um, I think one of the biggest struggles that we have here is that you're using the term evil to define this kind of nebulous thing that something is evil because it's inherently evil. But at no point did we really have an honest discussion about how these things were harming anybody. Like,
Well, they're sterilizing hundreds of kids at least in Europe
except that's
that
not,
they
but
have
not here.
shown. And
Yeah,
Oxford put out a thing
what thing?
that there have been hundreds of kids that in Europe have been sterilized because the dosage was higher, and they then detransitioned, and afterwards they were sterile because of the treatment they received.
Now, there are some actual known downsides to it. For instance, um, if you give a trans person with a penis puberty blockers too early, they may not develop enough skin on their penis to convert that into a vagina. But that's not something I'm assuming that you care about. But that is one of the known downsides of puberty blockers is it can affect some things because it keeps secondary sexual characteristics from developing. So yeah, but the sterility thing hasn't been shown to be proven here. I think pulling stuff out of a single study or becoming because it's a headline on Fox News, which
It,
is
it
fine.
was
I just
metadata that was compiled by Oxford sometime in the past 3 years. I don't have
right.
it in my notes anymore.
It's
I
okay. Like yeah, it's something people
we,
can look
we,
up.
we have gotten so far afield from my notes, which primarily focused on Magnus, the doctor in Nazi Germany that developed all of this rhetoric, and
Right.
then Dr.
It's a lot.
Money in John Hopkins, who has further developed and refined it into the state that it is today. And all of the prejudicial tendencies he had of forcing children to engage in sexual behavior and filming it, and so on and so forth.
But that doesn't have anything to do with science now. I mean, we already covered all of
That
that.
is what this is all predicated upon. If the
Yeah, and that,
foundation is that corrupt, why do you want to build upon it?
I don't even believe most of that's correct. But if we spend the whole time parsing over like the history of it, we avoid talking about what's going on now. And I think Carson is ready.
Okay, yeah, we just reached the 1 hour mark. So that is the end of the debate itself. I haven't decided if I think these should have specifically closing statements. That's something that you guys can decide if you want to do either
I'm down either
now
way.
or after questions.
Yeah,
But
this
anyways, I think that was a good conversation, and I do have a question I want to ask that I will ask on every debate before I ask all the audience questions. So the question that I'm going to have for both of you is, what would it take for you to change your mind on this topic? Um, and there might be a bazillion things that could be the answer to this question, but having it be the most simple, the easiest, or most realistic. But if you don't have an answer for that, you can go for unrealistic, and you are welcome to say that you don't have an answer at all. So, Daisy, go ahead and go first.
Well, it's just like any question that whenever these conversations have with when science is on one side, I will say, yeah, when the science and the studies and everything become convincing to the medical professionals who spend decades studying this stuff individually, sometimes agree that it's bad, I'll agree. Like, if enough people who study the subject matter say the moon is made of cheese, I'll be like, fuck it, the moon is made of cheese. Like, I'm not insane to the point where you couldn't convince me. It's just right now, that's not what these associations in the United States believe. So I will be convinced when they're convinced. I might go in front of them if I start seeing stuff in the institution move slowly, but the conversation isn't like that. So for me, since this isn't a moral stance, I believe that you should do everything you can to help children. I believe the treatment of trans kids does lower the self harm. I know that the suicide rate amongst trans people in general is really high because they're not venerated. They're treated really poorly. But still, if it was shown to be harmful to children, that would be something that we would have to navigate as a community and how we would try to help these young people because the treatments that we have are shown to be harmful. That's how the conversation changes because there isn't a movement to force kids to being trans. There's no benefit for it. It doesn't help anybody unless it helps themselves as determined by doctors. So it just goes back to that. When doctors and scientists are convinced that it's harmful, I will go along with that.
All right, Mister, how about you?
Let me collect my thoughts a little bit. So I think this originated with a incredibly destructive and genocidal intent. Mass sterilization being defined as a genocidal endeavor. Um, and I think that continuing to build upon that genocidal intent that originated with Nazi Germany in earnest with modern medicine is inherently and fundamentally flawed. If, however, we saw that vaginoplasty and all of these things were reasonable for 1 in 380,000 people, or maybe even if that went up to 1 in 100,000 people, and it was a significant minority rather than skyrocketing the way that it has, and there were in place rigid mandates that before the child's 8th birthday, you placate them. Once they're 8 years old, they can undergo therapy and therapy alone with no puberty blockers or anything, no mastectomies, anything before they're 18, only talking um, to get them to their 18th birthday. And then you can do hormone therapies and facial feminization surgeries and all of these things, or facial masculine surgeries, I suppose, beard growth and whatnot. I never really think about the other direction, but they
Sorry,
exist.
really quick,
Sorry, man.
Mister. Sorry to cut you off. I just real quick for this question. I just want to make sure that so we are talking about minors specifically,
Yeah,
not what the
I think
ideal
that
thing is. So what? Well, really quick, if there is anything, what could exist, whether it's information you could get or whatever, that would make you change your mind about the idea of minors having either puberty blockers or and top surgery?
I don't think that there's anything that could get me to agree to it for minors at all. Giving them counseling, giving them therapy, that is teaching them how to um, dismiss, teaching them how to, um, giving them coping mechanisms, giving them information on how to deal with these things. I'd be fine with that. But to actually start carving into them and to chemically alter them permanently and sterilize them is beyond the pale for me. And I don't think that should ever be done.
You know what I like about this is if Mister and I saw the world the same way, as in if he saw the world like I would do, the only difference that we would have in opinion is the 1 or 2 years between top surgery. Like that would be it, because since I believe all of the things that he says would if it had been there, he and I would actually agree with this because it is just talking. Puberty blockers is only a pause button for a couple of years, and I understand why you're against that, but because the consensus is it doesn't sterilize people. If Mister didn't believe that it is, he'd already be almost entirely in alignment. We wouldn't even be having a big discussion because it really would just be like, yeah, I mean, they have it sometimes when they're 16 and a half as opposed to 18, like, but this is after a decade of just talking. So I just find that fascinating that even when we had this conversation, Mister and I, the main things that we disagree about are just reality. But like if we were on my side, I just want to say I think it's interesting that he wouldn't have a problem with this as much as he does.
What I have a problem with, and maybe I am wrong, is the perceived victimization of these children and the intent to do harm through toxic compassion to these children.
Wow. All right.
Uh,
So Carson, you wanted to do questions?
Yeah, so I have some questions from the audience. It looks like all of them are actually for Daisy, and
Oh,
so
hi.
what we'll do here is we'll keep it kind of brief. But after
Sure.
Daisy answers the question, Mister, you could, if you notice anything within his answer that you want to like, poke at and challenge or whatever, you can. If you hear his answer and you just think we should go to the next one, we can go to the next one. But we do have about 23 minutes left, and we can just go through these. But since they all are for Daisy, I definitely want to give Mister a chance to hop in on each one.
Oh yeah, that's
So,
fine with me. I don't mind.
okay, so here's the first one from an honest doubter. It says, isn't gender modification ultimately based on the ego's cultural narrative about the body, imposing a cultural concept of who I should be onto a non cultural biological reality?
You know, there's this really funny thing that's noticed. Like, I do stand up, have been since like 2005. It's one of the reasons why this stuff doesn't like being like, because we're talking about me in a lot of these conversations about how like I'm evil because of like how I identify or that I'm a mental health case because of my pronouns and stuff like that. One of the things that's funny is when you talk to guys, especially cis, white, straight guys, they use this language where it's like you could have said this sentence in a way that people would read or speak normally. Like just you talking like that when you sounded like such a pretentious douchebag. Like I don't think that's the intent from this question. Who's an honest doubter? I just think it's so weird. Like if you walked up to me in a bar and been like, "Question: Isn't gender modification ultimately based on the ego's cultural narrative?" And I'm not trying to make fun of this
Daisy,
person, but
Daisy,
like
can I just ask
it's
you,
so
can you
wild.
restate that question? Because I have no idea what it was.
Right. Okay. Now let's go into it. So they're talking about gender modification being based on the ego's cultural narrative about the body. So my understanding, and mind you, like I'm trying to address is the way these things are constructed. It's like they are trying to be precise and obfuscate their point at the same time. Like what I would really like is a simple clarification so I can answer it in a simple format. I try to stay away from like the highfalutin language, not because it's inherently of ill usage to the conversation, but that because it kind of clouds this. We're being overly nuanced. So isn't gender modification not based on the ego's cultural narrative about the body's imposing a cultural concept of who I should be onto a non-cultural biological reality? Like that is such a word salad.
I could throw out what I think they mean by
Yeah,
it.
you
If
tell me what you think it is, and we'll see if
yeah,
we can figure it out. Like, I don't even care if
yeah, yeah.
Mister pops in on this. I would like to be able to answer this question in a way that shows that we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So I could use like tattoos as an example or something else. But
Okay.
let's say in the United States it is illegal for minors to get tattoos, and let's say five minors go off to some other country and they just get like an insane amount of like tribal face tattoos, and they come
Wild.
back and they come
Yeah.
back and everybody for some reason wants to like hop on this. They want to get these tattoos, and it's we're trying to decide should they be allowed to. So I think what this person is saying is so it's not a biological reality that
Oh, they're
people have
basically
the
saying it's similar
tattoos.
to that, right?
Yeah, yeah. So they're saying if the society is creating this cultural idea of this would be amazing, like in society, every 10-year-old wants the tattoo. Since it's not a biological reality to be born with this tattoo, should
Right.
we allow what the culture is dictating be something that we let
Okay, so this
children
is
do?
simple. Two things. Ultimately, the statistically negligible thing in this scenario, it kind of shows you, like the way that you explained it, how ridiculous it is. Because if it was just five children, it would be a news story because it was weird. This isn't that kind of case. The whole premise that it's a non-cultural thing is a premise that changes the conversation. Because remember, the conversation that I'm having, the point of view I'm having, is that this is biological. So the rest of the sentence, just the way the math works, is nonsensical. Because the premise is if this was a thing that you didn't believe, would it have a different outcome? And no, of course, if it was a thing I didn't believe, the answer then, of course, is yes. Yes, it would be a different outcome. But since we're not asking if the premise is different, we're assuming the premise is different than what I'm saying. Yeah, it inherently disagrees with my point of view if you change the foundation of the point of view. So I can't disagree with this that it's messed up that we're allowing kids to have their faces tattooed because in this analogy, I'm assuming that the face tattoos are normal. And that's
Mm,
so ridiculous that it's not even anything you can address because, once again, clearly nobody is advocating for face tattoos. Nobody is advocating for strange things to be done. They believe these things aren't harmful. And since I believe these things aren't harmful, what I believe is a rational thing because I haven't been convinced these things are harmful. They're convinced it's harmful, so they're baffled at the idea that I would behave this way. And that's all that this conversation really spins around to. So the answer to this person is I don't see things in a way where I could answer this thing, but if I did, I would agree with you. If it
okay,
was something that we just made up, then yeah, absolutely.
gotcha. Okay, next
And
thing we
my
got in here.
answer is
Mm.
1 second. My answer is Post Malone and Jelly Roll make great music. More power to them.
Okay. So we got Jeremy here with a statement that's sort of like a question. I guess I would like to hear from both of them or hear what both of them think about parents' knowledge of their own children and the ability to make accurate decisions about their well-being. So yeah, whatever you want to take out of that. So go ahead, Daisy, you go first.
Sure, thank you. I think this is a complex one. I really like this question because A, see how this was phrased in a way that I understood it immediately? Thank you, Jeremy. I think it's complex. I think this is the reason why one of the reasons why this is done with a team. Because like most parents, I want to assume that most parents, most Americans mean well. Doesn't matter what their ideology is. I think most parents would not want to harm their children. But this is where it kind of breaks off, just like how Mr. and I disagree. Mr. has kids. I don't think I have children. But we would treat the children differently when it comes to these conversations because I don't think I should tell my children that they can't be gay or that they should be, you know what I mean? So if I'm a parent that believes you can't be gay and it's a conversation about them being queer, or I don't think my kids should be trans, then my voice should be in there because I'm the legal guardian of that. But ultimately, it would end up being the team's cooperative conversation that would affect the treatment of this child. Like, however, if the parent is supportive of the child and their knowledge of that child is more empathetic, and this is how I would phrase it from my point of view, more empathetic, then their conversation is more valued if the conversation is around the benefits of it, simply because their intent for best care of their child is in alignment with medical stuff. So there's a nuanced conversation about outing, and this is frequently like these anti-trans, anti-gay initiatives bring in this conversation to the parents despite what the kid wants. That is an interesting conversation to have, and I think addressing this actual question, the parent knows kids, but I would tell you from my own family life that that's not true. I've cut off both my parents because the way that they behaved in childhood, they were abusive, emotionally and physically. Um, so I don't think my parents ever would have been in a place where their value in the conversation for my own mental health would have had any intrinsic value, simply because they were terrible parents. So some parents, yes, some parents, no. Unfortunately, life's a spectrum.
Gotcha. Okay, Mister, what are your thoughts?
I think that's actually a good answer, and there are extremes. So there is the Hanson family, which is the man and woman got a divorce, and the woman forcibly transitioned to the son in order to get back at her ex-husband, and that's a demonstrable case that is very disturbing. But then there are cases like Daisy's parents where the exact opposite is true, where they're harmful in the opposite direction. um, Parents have a responsibility and a duty and a requirement to operate in their children's best interest, because their children's best interest is also their own best interest. That is your progeny. You should be doing everything you can, establishing a Roth IRA the year they are born and fully funding it, and everything along the way to give them every advantage you possibly can. And that is what I expect of every parent. But I know many parents, if not most, fall short of that.
I think Mr. and I
Gotcha.
agree inherently on the idea. And like I was saying, I think every parent believes, well, most parents believe they're doing the best for the child. The disagreement mostly just comes on what they think the best is. Like the biggest difference is I don't have the moral authority. I believe in a consensus of medical science. Whereas Mr.'s argument includes more of like he believes that he has a moral um, gaius to make sure things happen a certain way. But yeah.
Okay, next question. And I just found out that maybe I missed a couple questions from this person, but at least I got this one saved here. So it
Mhm.
says, Daisy, don't you think getting any transgender medication and surgery should be at 18? This way they can make an adult decision.
This is where I'm going to be old and be like an 18-year-old is still a child. Like, yeah, I got married first at the 19, but like everything is so spectrumy. Like, the only thing that's different between 18 and 1 month and 17 and 8 months is mostly just like a little bit more facial hair and the fact that you can smoke cigarettes legally. Like, we just have to draw the line somewhere before we let people vote, and we've just decided that 18 is the age. So waiting until they're 18 is such a small thing for someone who's been in treatment for so long. You, the idea that you could force someone to transition to me is once again one of those stories that makes me go, okay, well then who did the surgery? Like, did they just not talk to this teenager, and the teenager just like if the teenager consented to it, how are they being forced? Like, I'm so curious about the details of the narrative, because if the narrative's true, then the belief seems justified. But I always go back to like, how is that a thing? Like, it just I don't understand how it would even happen. The idea that there's a surgeon out there that would do surgery on someone. But to getting back to the question, I think it's difficult to just be like, wait till you're 18 when they almost wait till they're 18 anyway. And the difference between somebody of a certain age, between 17 and 19, that difference could have a lot to do with long term impact. And that's the nuance that the medical teams have to discuss. That's what all of this ultimately is about. is harm reduction, because that's just, a Hippocratic oath, and moving forward what is in the best interest of this patient's health. Now, the parents lose guardianship at 18. So in some cases, 18 might be the youngest they could even get it done, because that's when the parent has no voice anymore. So while the child's consent and enthusiastic consent with the process should always be centered in this, I don't necessarily think that having them wait an extra few months, maybe a year on the outside, and even if it's a little bit longer, if it's done as young as 16, it's because the medical team themselves decides that it's that necessary. This isn't a frivolous surgery. These aren't done a lot. Doctors don't prefer to do surgeries on underage kids unless it's important. That's pretty universal.
Gotcha. Okay, and the same person has a question for Mister. Says there's a couple typos in here, but the main thing I get out of the question is at what age do you think education of LGBTQ plus stuff should happen in education? Like, do you think that's acceptable? Here it says at grade 12, college
16.
1, 16. Okay.
But it's a really straightforward
This,
answer.
yeah, I believe that once you have, and that's coming from the law in Indiana, which is where I was when I turned 16 and it became legal for me to have sex. And so that's just kind of my default of when kids are ready, because, well, if you subtract the molestation and when I didn't have a choice, my first time having sex when I was consenting was when I was 15. And so I do understand the need at 15 or 16 to have a robust and inclusive education. But when you start saying, well, you had it when you were 15, so there we need to do it to 14-year-olds. Oh, we started teaching it to 14-year-olds. Now 13-year-olds are doing it. So now we got to go to 13-year-olds. And hey, now we're down to 7-year-olds. Great. Back where we started with the Florida example. And it the slippery slope fallacy is predominant and used a lot because it is a heuristic that you can see in a lot of instances where you give an inch, they take a mile, and you see that a lot of times. You let Crimea go to Russia, and then they start another 3-year war. Anytime you give somebody an inch, they will try and take a mile. And that heuristic is also always described as the slippery slope fallacy when there is some truth to those two things. They are parallel. Now, when they do not come true, obviously it was a fallacy. But when they do come true, it was simply a heuristic. And there is no way to know going into something whether or not it's going to be a slippery slope or a give an inch, take a mile kind of scenario.
The whole slippery slope conversation is predicated on the idea that homosexuality and trans gender affirming care is inherently evil. So the reasons I can never really talk around this is because this is one of those things where homosexuality isn't evil, like it just exists. Teaching kids the fact that homosexuality exists isn't weird because they're going to talk to trans kids, they're going to talk to gay kids. And as someone who was homeschooled in a super religious family, I learned all these terms and I adapted my view of the world. And a lot of these kids are going to do that, but we're putting them at a disadvantage by not educating them. I work in a library, and then one of the children's books that we have, and this is like a cardboard little kids books, addresses poop. It's basically like why we poop or how we poop kind of stuff. Animals poop too. We teach them about
Everybody
poop at a pretty
poops.
young age, right? But just that counts as poop education. Like we're teaching them biological processes. So it is a spectrum. It's not just everything's on the table at younger ages. It's just that we find more nuanced ways to start conversations and introducing concepts to youth. We start teaching people fractions before we teach them calculus. So the terminology of like sex education and the way that it's used to kind of scare everybody is like, yeah, we do teach kids that gay people exist, but gay people exist. Like it's not, we don't go into scatology. That's something most kids, like adults, don't even mostly know that. So this question directly, we can pinpoint like where we should teach people, but in reality, is children should know what's the most appropriate for them to know, and that conversation is evolving. The way that we teach children also evolves, like, unless you're in Florida.
Gotcha. Okay, we got one last question here, and this one's for Daisy. It says, if trans affirmation reduces suicidality, why wasn't there a wave of childhood suicidality prior to modern medical consensus of trans affirmation?
This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about like not knowing. My first friend killed himself when he was 11. His name was Stuart. I was going to Taft Elementary in Boise, Idaho, and he was 11 years old. And this is the 80s. We were very much 80s kids, and I belonged to the freaks and geeks, unsurprisingly. We were the losers. We were the worst at sports. We just hung out with each other. We are a variety of wild children, and there's no thing on record about why he killed himself. So self-harm and the desire to commit suicide isn't tracked before the questions are asked. When we later come back and learn to ask questions, then we can be like, hey, currently, what is causing this? Where is this? They can coax that out. But we can't go back and look at the self harm, look at the depression among the children because those questions weren't asked and it wasn't even looked into. I had a therapist as a child because I was acting out in elementary school. I think in the fourth grade, I kicked over my desk and threw all my books at my teacher. But even though I had a therapist, and this was a few years when I was in Seattle before we moved back into Boise, uh, they didn't ask why. They didn't get out of me as like a 9, 10 year old why I was acting out. And they're helping me address the behavior as opposed to seeing this cause. So if that cause was gender dysphoria, and it wasn't, they wouldn't know. They would just know that when I later developed self harm and I later developed the mental health issues that I had, current understanding is a lot to do with who I was growing up. But there was no track. If I killed myself in my 20s, which was a possibility for a short period of time, they wouldn't have known. So the answer to this question is there was suicidality in children, but we didn't have the diagnostic tools. This whole conversation we've been talking a lot about the explosion of people identifying as trans. Is like, yeah, because they got the education to say that I don't align with my gender. One of the reasons that we don't want to teach kids younger is it stops the conversation. So it seems to be the solution on the other side is to keep kids from knowing what the words mean so they can't identify, with the intent to cut down the number of kids that identify. So that's what a lot of this conversation is. Well, we don't want them to know what it is because we don't want them to identify. Religion's job is to keep them from expressing themselves. Like we don't want to kill them, we just don't want them to be gay. So if we don't teach them they can be gay, or we don't teach them they can be trans, they don't have the language for coming out as trans, that they automatically solve the problem of children not being trans, despite the fact that no fundamental difference is being made in the child. Like myself, when I came out as an older adult, it was because after I was introduced to those things. It never changed who I was. However, it may have changed some of the mental health I dealt with when I was younger. The only difference is I learned these terms when I was later and still identified as something else. But if I had learned them earlier in a culture that was more open to that, I may have identified them earlier. I'm clearly put together enough to know who I am as an inside. Children are
Um,
learning.
Sorry, Daisy.
I,
Really quick, Harley, who asked this question, just wanted to mention to me that he didn't feel like the question was being answered, and
that's
he was
okay.
he kind of reworded it. So let me get that in here real quick, and then we got to hop off here. So he says, I didn't ask why kids commit suicide. I asked why there wasn't a wave of suicides. Um, I wasn't sure if you were saying
Okay.
in your answer that there was all the suicides. It's just nobody knew what they were for. Is that correct? Or how would you want to respond to this
I'm
follow
just
up he has
quickly
here?
looking up. just because child suicide is not something I went into a lot of detail. We know what current suicide ideology is with trans identifying children now.
Yeah.
Suicide over like
Yeah, the question
grabs.
is, why wasn't there 23,000 annual suicides by children prior to the trans movement being identified?
Oh yeah, well, here's the deal. Less people want to kill themselves for being trans because there's more people wanting you not to be trans that are violently acting it out. Like it used to be a passive, like Cold War situation with being openly queer, where a lot of this stuff existed. But now, I mean, listen to the hostility. Listen to talking about stamping this stuff out. Listen to us talking about how it's a mental health issue or how they're being manipulated. If you're a child and that's a message that's out there, like if a child listened to this conversation, they're gonna hear an entire adult with children tell them that they have mental health problems, that people are taking advantage of them, that the adults and doctors in their lives mean them harm. Yeah, some of those kids are going to want to kill themselves. So one of the reasons we didn't see as much suicide around this before is we weren't trying to tell them they were broken before. We weren't telling them that they were committing sin or that they were evil or that evil had an influence on them. So you can see how if we bully children as adults and tell them that they're broken and that the world is against them, some of them are going to have some mental health issues. We're the problem.
And to be
We.
clear, oh,
Oh no, go ahead, Mister. It's fine.
to be clear, I'm not saying that the children themselves are evil. I'm saying the doctors, nurses, and psychologists that are perpetuating this are the evil ones that are doing malicious harm and not living up to their Hippocratic oath.
You're right, and I understand that that's your point. I just don't think that that exists. I think individuals might be like that. Like, there's a lot of truckers. Some of them are serial killers, but I'm not going to assume that all are serial killers just because there's a couple out there killing people. So even if there were doctors and nurses that were crazy like this, it's not all of them. I find that incredibly difficult to believe that all the children who specialize in childcare and trans childcare are inherently evil or trying to commit evil. To me, that just seems wackadoo. Like, yeah, they have conferences where they talk about how to hurt children. Like, I don't even know. Yeah, see, this is something that I have a difficult time not laughing at because it's like, okay, so there's doctors out there that are like, fuck these kids. What? So yeah, I don't mean that respectfully, Mister. It's just to me, the ideology is baffling if somewhat humorous because I just can't see how what you believe is true. Not that there's anything wrong with you, just you believe these things. I don't. That's just why. If you didn't believe these things, we'd be in agreement on how silly it is. But you do. So
All right, so I got to stop you guys now
I
because, well, Mister, I just got to stop you because I do have to go about a couple minutes ago. But this debate was great. I want to thank you both for coming out. I have a couple
yeah,
different ideas for ways we can do follow ups. I
Daisy,
like
do
that.
you have a Discord?
Yeah,
not right now.
I'll get you guys in touch with
But
each
yeah,
other.
yeah, sure,
I'll
Mister
send
Straight.
yeah, I'll help you guys get in touch with each other. I just got to say a couple things to wrap a few things up. I do want to do follow-ups where we look at statements that were made, look into facts, and then maybe I do follow-ups where I bring each of you on just a talk to say, what do
Sure.
you think of this now that you've read this study, this kind of thing. I think there could be a few interesting routes we can go that most debates don't usually do with afterwards follow-ups because I love the idea of learning new things through debate. But anyways, I want to thank you guys for coming. I want to thank the audience for watching. There are a lot of awesome questions and good conversations over there. If anybody is listening and wants to do a debate like this, just contact me, and I'm going to be setting up a bunch of these. And if either of these two have YouTube channels or anything like that now or in the future, links will be in the descriptions. And yeah, you guys have a great day.
You too. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Um,
All right.
you
Take
too,
care.
and yeah, this went off the rails from what I expected.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, maybe we'll have a chance to do a follow up with it at some point.
I'm
But yeah,
sorry that
already.
it wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. I think
Oh
it
yeah,
went
your alarm's going off.
perfectly
You
fine.
take care.
Yep. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.